All right, so we're going to do the Graft deck here for Modern Masters 2015. Again, just to kind of do a quick recap, we're going over some of the draft archetypes that are going to be available in Modern Masters 2015. Going over what we think, how a draft might play out for certain decks. In this case, the Graft deck. Looking at what's at common, what's at uncommon, what rares you might be looking for, and specifically rares that might get passed to you later on. Of course, you don't see Tarmogoyf in here. You don't see Vendilion Click. You're not going to see a card like Indomitable Archangel in a white. So we're looking at cards that are kind of targeted towards the deck, cards you can get later, and cards that are going to be good in the deck for you. So you see, like in this deck, some of the top end cards that you might draft first might be an Overwhelming Stampede or an Air Servant or something like that. But then when you get into the kind of the guts of the deck, these are all going to be picks 3 through 8 and really help build out your deck. So let me pull up the preview pane here. And it's gone. And there it is. Let's make this... we'll go about that big.
So one thing, if you're going to watch these in orders, I have a correction from the last video. The Hikari Twilight Guardian is uncommon.
Wow, I would have swore that was rare.
That's why I was asking about it, because I remembered seeing it on uncommon.
Awesome.
But yeah, anyways.
Awesome.
So that's another really good spirit.
I think we can add a comment on that.
Yeah, great.
So. All right, so let's go over the Graft deck. This is the deck I'm kind of most excited about. I think it's the deck I think this deck and tokens are kind of the decks that can go off. The Spirits deck that I highlighted last time was kind of, I feel like it's a grind you out and then finish you really quickly, whereas this deck, like, if it hits the right cards on turns 3 through 5, you can just get like 3 6/6s out. So I'm going to go over, let's start with what I consider some of the key cards for the deck. I'm going to start up on this end. The first card I'm actually going to highlight, Helium Squirter. This is one of your win conditions. It is already a grafter, so it's 5 for a 3/3, and for 1 mana, it gains any creature with a +1/+1 counter on it gains flying. So again, the idea is that you graft a bunch of stuff up to. You play a 2. You want to play on curve a 2, a 3, a 4 Helium Squirter. The next turn you have an army of flyers that you can pay 4 mana and make them all fly, or do one at a time, or whatever you need to do. I actually think this is one of the most key cards in the deck. At 5, you probably don't want more than 2 because you don't want to clog down your top end. But it's just critical to finish off the games. There's enough, stuff that gets in the way, enough tokens that can just chump you for a long time, that even having like a 5/5 Aquastrand Spider or something like that, it's just not good enough, and this is just going to let you kind of go over the top. So having 1 or 2 of these are a common, let you finish off players with this specific deck. Probably the best card in the deck, this is an uncommon, is Cytoplast Rootkin. Unfortunately, the text is a little small because there's so much of it, so let's go here. So this guy is awesome. He's 4 for a 4/4. He actually is the Spore Sower Thallid. I think he's the Spore Sower Thallid of this Modern Masters. It's 4 for a 4/4, and when it comes into the battlefield, you get an extra +1/+1 counter on each other creature that already has a +1/+1 counter on it. So, like, if you can curve Aquastrand Spider into Vigian Graft Mage into Cytoplast Rootkin, you get a 3/3, a 3/3, and a 4/4 on turn 4. You could even graft, if you made this guy, say, a 2/2, and then made this a 3/3, and then when this guy comes into play, you make him like a 5/5, and then pump these guys back up so that they can graft again. It's really good. And I guess, since I'm talking about graft, in case you're unfamiliar of the way graft works, when another creature enters, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters, so they're all 0/0 creatures. When another creature enters the battlefield, each of your graft creatures triggers, and you can move 1 counter off of them onto the new creature. The new creature does not have to have graft. It can be any creature in your deck. It can just be a grizzly bear that has no abilities, and you can move the counters from them.
Oh my god! I just remembered. It's not when it enters the battlefield under your control, right?
That's right.
It's going to be really annoying in Magic Online.
On Magic Online, these trigger every creature.
Oh my god!
So it's super
You're going to
annoying.
be playing Graft against
Lots
tokens?
Of clicks. Yep, lots of clicks.
I'm not playing Graft anymore.
Well, too bad, because I like it a lot.
No, I do too, but...
So Cytoplast Rootkin is a card at uncommon that I would start targeting at, like, picks. If you start with a strong blue card or a couple strong green cards, if you start seeing these that pick like 3 or 4, this is just such a good card in the deck that you can start to look to move in to the Graft deck at that point. Other key cards to the deck: Plaxcaster Frogling at uncommon. This is a 3/3 for 3, and you can give your creatures Shroud that have if they have a +1/+1 counter on them. So this negates all removal essentially for 2 mana on all your Grafters. This is an uncommon. It is 2 colors, so therefore you might get these a little later than like say a Cytoplast Rutkin, which is just going to be strong in any green deck. So this is a card you're maybe wanting to pick up, maybe picks 5 through 8, especially towards like pack 2 and 3 once people are more cemented into their archetypes. This card does not really work great in most other, even there's probably not another blue-green deck, and if there is, they're not going to look to splash a card like Plaxcaster Frogling. So this is a card you're going to want to look to pick up in packs 2 and 3 later in the pack. Going over, I really want to focus on, again, kind of just the strong cards, and then we'll go through the filler. I think the other card I do want to highlight before we go through some of the filler is Thrumming Bird. So Thrumming Bird is a 1/1 flyer, and when you deal combat damage to a player, you proliferate. So the hope with Thrumming Bird is that you have it on turn 2, and your opponent does not have a flyer or removal, because that way any creature you play with Graft afterwards, anytime this hits a player, you proliferate, which lets you put an extra +1/+1 counter on any permanent that has a counter on it, which in this case would be creatures. As Brian and I were talking about earlier today, Brian was initially like, well, are you sure Thrumming Bird's that good? And then we realized, oh yeah, not only is it good on turn 2, if you play, say, Aquastrand Spider into Graft Mage into Rootkin and then play this on turn 5 and Graft from these 3 creatures, now you have a 4/4 flyer that makes itself bigger each turn and all of your other creatures. So Thrumming Bird is something that you're definitely going to want to target early once you've cemented yourself into the Graft deck. I just think it's too strong to ignore, and the synergy is just too great to ignore it. And if it was just good on turn 2, that'd be one thing, but like we said, it just gets it's fine really at any stage of the game as long as you have Grafters in play. Some of the other filler, what I'll call filler cards, are just sort of, they're going to fill out your Graft deck. Aquastrand Spider is a great 2-drop. I think you will be vying with some other green decks for these too, because there's not a lot of 2-drops available, so these are cards you may take higher than some of the other ones, since I think any green deck will be happy to play this as a 2/2 on 2. Simic Initiate is not a card you want to go too deep on, but I do think playing 1, especially if you get the right mix of like Thrumming Birds and Steady Progress, which we'll go over in a second, will be a great card. Gnarled Pack I think is actually fine for a deck like this. This is the other sort of Grizzly Bear option at common, but it gets counters when you kick it. So if you, say, pay 2 extra mana, make it a 4-mana 3/3 with a +1/+1 counter. Works well with your Thrumming Birds, works well with your Steady Progress, like I said, which we'll go over in another second. So I think this is another card you want to target, especially to stay on curve early. I've got a couple other sort of generally good cards, a Mana Leak, a Narcolepsy, which are going to be top picks regardless of any blue player will play Narcolepsy. So when I was talking about looking at, say, Rootkin at like pick 3, this is, unless it's a weak pack, you're probably going to look to grab these. Probably not going to first pick it. You're really looking to get something that's like 1 color, not in an archetype, and then look for your archetype a little bit later. A card like Narcolepsy is going to do that. A card like Mana Leak might be like that. You'll see some others later. This is kind of even Overwhelming Stampede. I think is a very first pickable card. I think it works in multiple archetypes in green. So this would be like, maybe you go, again, Overwhelming Stampede. Next best card is Narcolepsy. Then you see a Cytoplast Rootkin, and you go, I'm going to go for the Graft deck, and then you try to fill it out with.
I think that in synergy heavy sets, it's very important to stay open in the first couple picks until you can really see not just a color that's open, but a deck that's open.
Completely
agree.
And
so if you can grab cards like Mana Leak that are good in multiple decks, you're just going to do yourself a lot of service.
Yep. Some cards to pick up that you might get. Let me talk about Steady Progress too. So this is just 3 mana, proliferate, draw a card at instant speed. This can be a combat trick. This can be end of turn. You hold up Mana Leak and you've got 2 Grafters in play, and then you do this and draw a card. I think this is a very solid pick for this deck. I mean, if you have 3 Grafters out or 3 creatures with counters, and end of turn you just pump them all 1 and draw a card, that's a great card. And I don't think that's like some people talk about what they call Magical Christmas Land, like, well, that'll never happen, those are just hypothetical scenarios. Like, if you're playing enough creatures with counters, in this case we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, you're going to have a lot of times 10 to 12 creatures with counters on them, or that can get counters all on their own. and it's going to work really well.
I think that steady progress is going to be underrated at the start, because I think it's a lot better when you're putting +1/+1 counters on your own creatures, which is the typical case for this, than it is when you're putting -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures that might already not have negative counters on them.
Some cards that are going to work really well in just your deck that you can maybe target later are going to be Lore Scale Coatl, which plays into the counter theme. It starts as a 3-mana 2/2, and then every time you draw a card, you get a +1/+1 counter on it, so your natural draw phase is going to get bigger one each turn. If you can play stuff like Steady Progress, and Tezzeret's Gambit, which I think I have in the sideboard, he's just going to get bigger every time you draw. Mystic Snake, having such a heavy requirement for green and blue, is going to be a card that you may see get past pack 2 and 3 around the table because no one else can play it, and it's an awesome card in this deck. If you play this, you're going to counter a spell, and if you have Grafters out, you can just make a 4/4 Snake, end of turn, or on their turn, eat something as a surprise, counter a spell. It's fantastic. The other thing that Graft does really well is there's Arrest is a common in the set. Arrest doesn't care about it. Stops. You can't attack. You can't block. You can't do activated abilities, but you can move these counters off with Graft onto your other creatures. So Graft kind of plays around Arrest probably the best in the set. I don't think there's too much other. There's Sacrificing with like Bloodthorn Vampire, but that's really a minor theme. I really feel like Graft gets around Arrest really well, and it's almost a dead card because you're just gonna if they play it on a Grafter.
It does. It's not. I mean, it does turn off the activated abilities. So like Helium Squirter won't be able to grant flying anymore because that's an ability on the Helium Squirter. It doesn't give your other creatures that ability.
That aspect is true, and it's not. They don't want to overlook that, but the fact that you can just move the counters off and then the creature dies and they arrest and they go to the graveyard is great. I threw an Air Servant in here because this is another example. Again, you could go Air Servant into Narcolepsy into this deck, pack 1, very easily. Air Servant's a first pickable card, so another example of a card you might play in this deck. Overwhelming Stampede I mentioned earlier. This is a great way to finish off. It gives all your creatures trample, a +X/+X. This is a better fit in this deck than like the Tokens deck, which I'll go over in a second. The last two cards I have in the main deck is one of them is Thrive, which I really want to point out because I actually think this can be a really good card both in this deck and the Tokens deck. I think this is going to be a card you get in the second half of a draft, and if you want it, you really want 1 or 2 in your deck. The ability to just throw a bunch, pay 4 mana, pump all your creatures by 1, pump a 2 and a 2 and a 3, or even if you can go like Simic Initiate 1, 2, 3 into this, I think is going to be good. I don't think you're going to want more than 1 in most decks unless you have like 18 creatures. But having 1, I think this is going to be a good card. And then I have a card like Repeal 2, which is great to get a blocker out of the way, draw a card. This is just a perfect card for a deck like this. It'll go in all the blue decks, so this is just another generic card. So let's move into the sideboard.
Let's have Remand, which is a generic
blue card. Remand is another generic blue card, which this deck would be happy to play too, I think. So what do we have over here? Just a few cards to highlight. This is the other Grafter, I think, that's not in the main deck. It's not a rare. I believe it's an uncommon in this set. This lets you draw cards, so if you need to draw out of it, or again, another situation like, let's say one of your Grafters has an Arrest on it, or otherwise is sort of outclassed, you can just start removing counters to draw cards, which is great. So I've got that one over here. I think Inexorable Tide is another card that's just disgusting in this deck if you can pull it off. Like, if you can, every time you cast a spell, after it's down, you proliferate, and if you've got Graft, if you're targeting +1/+1 counters, you're just going to go off. All your stuff is just going to keep getting bigger. And like Thrive becomes double Thrive. Repealing a creature.
Wait, does it though?
Sure.
So you cast it.
Kind of. I mean, all your creatures with counters are already going to get them.
Right.
And then Thrive all happens after that.
Right.
So, assuming you're doing it on creatures already with +1/+1
right.
counters.
Yeah.
Tezzeret's Gambit is like Steady Progress, except at sorcery speed, and 1 more mana and 1 extra card.
Yeah, I mean, it's Divination.
Yep, it'll be and you can play it at 3 too. With the Phyrexian mana. Which
I would probably play that card without. Well, maybe not in this set. Never mind.
So it's good.
Yeah.
Good in this deck. Tumble Magnet is another card I think you might be able. That's going to be underrated early, as it was in Scars of Mirrodin, and it works really well in this deck, especially the more proliferate you get. If you start with 3 counters on it, and you remove a counter to tap an artifact or creature. if you can get more than 3 uses out of this, it's so good because you're going to have big creatures. You're naturally going to start getting bigger and bigger creatures with your grafts and your proliferates, and then just tapping down guys and getting in there for a bunch of damage. This card's going to be awesome in this deck.
I mean, 3 turns of tapping something down, like, that is, like, and that's the worst case scenario with this card. That, I mean, that is sometimes a fifth of a game.
Yep, that's... And early on, like if you go like 2-drop, 3-drop into this, and then like into a proliferate or something like that, and you're just tapping a guy each turn, and they're having to, and you're tapping their biggest guy each turn. Like that's awesome.
Though I do hate the really awkward when you have a Tome Magnet and with the last counter on it, but you don't have any of your proliferate cards in hand. You're just like, do I do it or do I? Yeah.
Last card to highlight here is Etched Oracle. You're already playing 2 colors. If you can figure out a way to get like one of the bounce lands or a Rampant Growth or Alloy Mirror, which is that common, or even just playing it for 2 and proliferating if you've got them in your deck,
or grafting 2 more onto it.
Grafting 2 more onto it. I think this is a fine card in this deck as well.
I like that. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. I know how you like drawing cards, so this one's...
I love drawing cards.
Just for you.
Yeah.
So that's the Graft deck. I actually think this is the deck I'm most looking forward to. Yeah. I think it looks super fun to play. I think it lets you draw cards, make big creatures, and I think that because... I don't know how well Graft was received the first time. I'm wondering if it's going to be underdrafted initially. I'm hoping that's the case, and I'm hoping I can get a couple of these under our belts before people realize. Because looking at it... here, and you know what? While we're doing this... One of the cool things that I was looking at yesterday that we did not do for the Spirits deck is we can do a sample hand.
Oh, neat.
So let's check this hand out. How does this look? 1-drop, 2-drop Grafter, which we can make this guy into a 3/3. One thing you have to consider is Burst Lightning and Lightning Bolt are both in this set. So you have a 1 mana 2 damage instant speed spell and a 1 damage 3 damage, or 1 mana 3 damage instant speed spell. So that's something you're always going to keep an eye out for. When you're playing a card. So in this case, you may want to go like 1-drop, 2-drop into Gnarlid Pact to make this a 4/4 and put it out of reach of both of those spells. But like here, 1-drop into 2-drop, draw another card. What do we get? So that's a blank. So there we play our second land. Here's our third spell. So we get stuck on 2 lands, but now we have a 1 and a 2 up. We could play Gnarlid Pact to make it a 4. We'd end up with a 4/4 and a 1/1. We could hold Mana Leak up. These are bad another, but we have again
exactly
the one thing about this deck is it still have a low curve.
So we're getting mana screwed here, but we could have played 4 spells already with 2 mana. That's pretty good.
So and not only that, end up with like a 4/4 creature and so on and so forth. So not a great. So the hand was great. Didn't draw enough mana, but it still eventually got some good stuff. So we'll take a mulligan. How's this? These are Badger hands for sure.
Yeah.
Take another mulligan, see what this looks like. So here we got a 2 into a 5. Let's see how some of these might play out.
Flooded to death. Awesome. Why are we playing Magic?
I know. I don't know. This game
Charging Badgers is no longer a Magic podcast. We're switching.
So we have one really good card in this hand. So here's a 2. So 1-drop. Let's say we play a Forest.
Sure.
Draw. Then we play Island into Aquastrand Spider. Draw another card. Then we play Island into probably Pass. Then we play... Oh, right on time, Black Scaster Frog. Then we probably play Cytoplast Rootkin, making our Aquastrand Spider a 3/3. Then we probably play another Cytoplast Rootkin, or maybe even Plaxcaster Frog to do Shroud on our creatures. Let's do 1 or 2 more here. So here we've got Aquastrand. So let's see. Turn 1 we'll play a Forest. Turn 2 we'll play Island, Aquastrand Spider. Turn 3 we'll play Forest, Vigian Graft Mage. Probably stick with 2 2/2s to start with.
But so we could play the Vigian Graft Mage, or we would have the option to we could also attack with the Aqua Strand Spider and have
Study
Progress as a combat trick that would also draw us a card.
That depends what our opponent's doing. So we've got that as an option. So this would be our 4th turn, so we could go like Island, Simic, Initiate, and then this could be where we Study Progress and make it a 3/3, a 3/3, and a 2/2. Draw another card.
I feel like this deck is a lot like the Simic Evolve deck, but less curve dependent.
And then now we get to our 5th mana. We could play Gnarlid Pact for 4, and then grafting onto it. We could play Thrive for 3 and make all of our creatures bigger. That would give us like a 4/4, a 4/4, and a 3/3. I think. which is pretty gross. Let's do one more. So here we've got a Simic Growth Chamber, the bounce lines that I was talking about. So I think this would be a keep. Let's draw. So now we even drew perfect. So we can go like Forest. Let's say we played Forest first turn, Island second turn into Spider. Draw another card. What are we at here?
Thrumming Bird.
Now we can go Thrumming Bird, play Growth Chamber, bounce one of our lands.
Oh, this is gross.
Replay Forest. So now we have 4 mana, and we can go. We could Thrive, putting counters here and here. We could go Vigian Graft Mage to put another 2/2 into play. We could hold up.
Yeah,
Steady
so we would
Progress. We have options.
I mean, just imagine, like there, we could thrive onto the Thrumming Bird.
Yep.
Swing.
Proliferate.
Next turn we have Steady Progress. We have a 4/4 flyer on turn.
That's making itself bigger each turn.
Yeah, that's wow.
So and then into an overwhelming Stampede or something like that. So I mean, like this deck can just boom go off and quickly get out of like Lightning Bolt and Burst Lightning range for like its biggest top 2 or 3 creatures. And even if you can't and you're playing red, like you can keep up a mana leak. You can play Plaxcaster Frog to give your creature shrouded instant speed. Like it seems legit based on what I'm looking at here. So
yeah.
All right, so that is the blue-green Graft deck, kind of highlighted with how it might end up looking up. Next, we will go on to Elementals. We're going to take a quick 20-second break if you're on the stream, just to give a break. And if you're on YouTube, you can just go right to the next video.
I'm going to grab water. Do you want any?
No.